Hey everybody, welcome to this month's chat with myself and Lynn Acton. And I was eager to talk about versatility and kind of the all-around horse, and here is why. I used to think it was kind of a good ideal to have a horse that, well, personally, I love dressage, but I also like to be able to ride outside the arena and not feel like I'm taking my life in my hands, if you know what I mean. But increasingly, the longer I've spent time with horses, the more I realize that versatility is not just an ideal. It is, if you are going to have a sound horse that doesn't end up with these vague injuries and needing a ton of injections and vet visits and all the things that I see with increasingly younger and younger horses, you need to have cross training and a variety of activities be part of your program from a physical standpoint. So that's what I'm going to explore. And Lynn is going to take things from a slightly different angle. But this quote here, the effect of schooling must be that the number of temporarily sidelined horses remains small. This is taken from, it's called HDV 12. It's the German Army regulations. So obviously this book is fairly old at this point, but much of what I'm going to talk about pulls from this guide. And I think it is important to remember that many of our disciplines, including dressage, had a very practical basis. It came from the military. So talk about cross training, right? Talk about a very durable cross-trained horse for having longevity. So I'm going to hand the metaphorical reins over to Lynn to further get the ball rolling.
Okay. Well, let's define first what we mean by a versatile horse. One aspect is that the horse is able to do multiple different jobs. This is my bronze as an example. I did not set out to create a versatile horse. I had not really thought of all of the incredible benefits that you just mentioned. It sort of happened by accident because Bronze and I both got bored easily. So I just took every opportunity to try new things. So we did trails and we did some dressage and we did equagility. And I found that I could also turn him over safely to my grandson, who doesn't really know how to ride, but he faked it well. And in the process of doing uh, dressage, I found that Bronze was bored unless we played music. So I started using music for training, turned that into musical freestyle, and we were going to go to a couple of shows and do our musical freestyle at dressage schooling shows, but he'd never been to a show. So we also, as part of his versatility, we went to a few hunter shows where we rode in all the flat classes we were eligible for and got last place in every single one. But it became a wonderful learning experience for Bronze, who discovered that he could listen to me and focus amidst an awful lot of what originally looked like chaos to him. Another aspect of versatility is we kind of need to be able to take horses different places, do different things, and hope for them to be able to work both independently and in groups. And this is your picture, Jack. It looks like you have a clinic going here with some horses who are just as attentive as the riders are.
Yeah, so you touched briefly there on the emotional component. The reason, from a very practical standpoint, that working independently and in groups is very important to me is if you're able to do this, you are therefore able to ride your horse at different intensities. And you hear me talk a lot about avoiding repetitive movement. If you ride only by yourself, chances are good that you are a little bit in a rut in terms of muscle fiber recruitment. You're always kind of doing the same energy output. And then, heaven forbid, if your horse isn't used to being around other horses, it becomes this high adrenaline affair when one or two or more come into the arena with you. And so, and you can't manage that. So now your horse is like in a not productive zone. So you need to be able to have them feel comfy, and they do feel comfy in groups. They're social animals. And I find that group lessons are a great way to energize horses that work a lot on their own and kind of get stuck in the doldrums. They don't have a lot of expression, and they get in a group and they don't fly off the handle. They just have a little more pep in their step, and that allows us to get more conditioning done.
And I found when I took Bronze uh, into the hunter shows, he had to learn to cope. It was really quite an effort for him to learn to cope with focus on me while all these things are happening around him. But it was such good learning for him emotionally that when we got to the dressage show, we went in the arena and he looked around and like, wait, I don't have to dodge 10 other horses and a bunch of jumps. Piece of cake here. So it really, I think, expands a horse's ability to cope with different situations. So you've already touched on some of the physical benefits of this, but the mental health part of it really is important too. Without doing anything in particular that's competitive, variety helps reduce burnout. We often hear about horses who have been schooled only for the specific discipline they're competing in, and they just get completely burned out and don't want to do it anymore. It also builds confidence. And of course, when a horse is confident, he's safer because fewer things are strange and scary. And then if a horse needs a new home or has a career-ending injury in his main competitive um, discipline, the his opportunities are more expanded, different rehoming opportunities or job opportunities, and you can have fun with no pressure to perform, which can also be good for the horse's mental health and your own. My one foray into team penning was on my friend Standardbred, who was 16.3. We were not galloping anywhere. We managed to pen our cows at a walk. Um, but by the end of the time, Sassy, who thought maybe cows were really scary, had discovered they weren't scary at all. So it turned into very quickly a positive learning experience for him. We need to start with realistic expectations, and these are going to vary with the horse. There's the limitations of a horse's physical ability, and this is Shiloh in the picture. She came to us at the age of 2 with Lyme disease, and by the time it was diagnosed, her joints had been compromised. And so Shiloh was never going to be a horse who could jump or do dressage, but she could hike around trails and she could do some basic agility. And so you have to be realistic and not hope for a horse to do something that he's not physically able to do. And some horses naturally have a more adventurous personality than others, so it might take a little more persuading and encouragement to help a horse who's more timid get accustomed to going into new situations. And of course, any horse who's had the more positive experiences a horse has behind him, the more likely he is to be ready to try new things and feel confident doing it. So contributing to versatility, we start with good basic training, which is often misunderstood and misguided into something specialized rather than just focusing on good, safe basics. And we need the physical ability and fitness for the activity and the confidence to cope emotionally. And I think a lot of times people don't think of the latter two things until they're kind of in over their heads. So good basic training is really the same for all disciplines. We need to have safe ground manners. Brandy's showing off her extra safe ground manners as she's being led by a 6-year-old. And then for riding, we need good mounted control at a walk trot, preferably also at a canter. And from there, Jack, how soon should a horse really specialize in something in some particular discipline? It seems to me that there's a lot of basic work that they need to have before they need any sort of specialized training.
Well, yeah, and I'll touch on that in a bit, but I find, just to reference again this HDV12 because it is so simply laid out. I like things really simple and clear. But the thinking has generally been historically that a horse, any horse, should reach about second or third, approximately second or third level dressage. So ability to collect a little bit, extend a little bit, bend nicely side to side, move off the leg, et cetera, et cetera. And if the training goes smoothly, that happens within 2 years of consistent work. So after about 2 years of learning those basics within the paces, now that doesn't mean during that time you forsake riding out and working on some of these other things we're talking about. That needs to happen concurrently. But let's say you want to go on and be a jumper, hunter jumper, rainer, whatever your specialty is, it would happen after the first 2 years of basic training.
So, and at the same time as the horse is doing basic training, we can introduce new activities because each success at something new builds a horse's confidence. We can start in the arena. Shiloh is showing her confidence with an agility obstacle that involves flags in her face. And Jack, that's your picture. Is that you and Corazon?
Yeah, yeah. We're playing around at the local obstacle course there.
And that's perfect. Playing is exactly what horses need. You have a positive emotion going with something that's new, like putting his feet up on that platform. And um, those are the kinds of successes that get the horse ready for more. You can start exploring and riding outside the arena as soon as you have safe control of the horse. Uh, you don't even have to have a lot of space. This is just a little walk up the driveway. Brandy went to the top of the driveway and inspected the recycle bin. And Bronze always liked to stop on the way home from a trail ride and collect the mail. But as we take horses to new places, I want to make sure that first expeditions are always fun, going someplace that is minimal stress and no expectations for performance, because it's the positive emotions the horses come away with that make something successful for them. So on the left, we have Opie, the Dartmoor pony, who came to play with agility toys at my place, his first trailer ride with his new owner. And he's just playing and having fun and in expressing his curiosity. And the other photo is Bronze crossing a creek, something he always thought was great fun. So going on a trail ride to cross a creek was his idea of a good time. And using natural terrain for training is a long-standing tradition, and this probably ties into what you were mentioning from your German book, Jack. Because as I recall reading Colonel Podolsky's My Horses, My Teachers, he talked about riding horses out on natural terrain as a routine. I mean, that was part of that 2 years of basic training, right?
Absolutely. It is part of what develops them physically, but the points that you're touching on too builds their confidence, their eagerness to try, to trust, to have a relationship with the rider, all of these things. And it's frustrating to me to see people who are stuck in the arena and things aren't going well, and they think they need to keep banging away at things in the arena. And you might make the suggestion, ride them out, and they don't see the connection. For many riders, these are separate endeavors, but they're really interwoven for the horse, physically and mentally, emotionally.
Yes, yes. The going out in natural terrain encourages them to go forward much more easily than kicking away with your legs. And things like obstacles on the trail give meaning to why do we have to steer properly. And and we have the practical application of lateral movements, which come almost intuitively, in my experience, to a horse when we have a context for them. So yeah, we do need to leg yield around trees. And in order to open and shut gates, we need to be able to do turns on the forehand and haunches. We need to side pass. But all of these things make sense to a horse when we're out doing them on natural terrain. And this Al Dunning, the famous reining trainer, has said that he can't imagine how anybody could truly train a good reining horse without taking them out in natural terrain where they learn to use their bodies well and want to go forward. And the late John Winnett, an Olympic dressage rider, said the same thing. He talked about a horse whose training was going nowhere in the ring. And just as you said, Jack, he took the horse out on natural terrain, and the horse ended up going to Grand Prix level.
Mhm.
And here's one of his, and I love this picture because you see the horse sitting back, using her body, putting her weight back on a loose rein there. And the rider's not interfering at all. The rider's just beautifully balanced.
So again, this was one of the things because I was trying to distill a list of, it's not to say you need to do everything with your horse because there's so many options. But I was really trying to distill things down into when we say a versatile horse and the physical for me necessity of that, what are the key activities that I actually mean? And one of them is the ability, and we talked about it already, starting ideally from the horse's early training, if you have the horse when it's a youngster, but crossing streams, small barriers, and hills. And there's a number of reasons for this. And you've touched on kind of the confidence part of it and the relationship with the rider. There was a recent article in the Canadian Horse Journal just last month on, and it was not authored by me, so I'm happy to see other people are talking about proprioception, but the necessity of horses getting out on uneven terrain to improve their proprioception. So that kind of internal monitor for their nervous system on where their limbs are in time and space and what degree of intensity of muscle contraction they need to make the next move. This is all based on proprioceptors in the body. And when horses are on perfectly level terrain all the time, even if they're getting exercise regularly, those signals get really diminished. So, from a physiological need, they have to be out on uneven terrain. And if you don't live somewhere with hills, I understand that, but there are probably ditches. That's what this photo is. It's just a ditch in our field. And it's not very big, but you can see it's pretty uneven and lumpy. And you can see how flexed the horse's haunches are, which was my second point here, is that navigating these things, barriers, small hills, ditches, natural objects, it recruits the horse's extensor chain. That's the top muscle chain. So the upper neck, the long back, the glutes, the hamstrings, those are the same muscles that both flex the hindquarters for collection and propel the horse forward. They need to be really, really strong to be able to maintain collection because they have to be engaged while the limb is in a flexed position, which is not really natural for the horse. It would be the same as us walking with our knees slightly bent. So if you do a light squat and then try to walk across your living room, you probably feel a thigh burn, pretty quickly. So those muscles need to be quite strong. And riding out on different terrain is just one more way to recruit them and access them in a slightly different manner than riding around the arena doing all of your arena things. And for that reason, it's often a faster way to make progress, which is why if you hear frustration in my voice with me not being able to get dressage riders out of the arena, this is why. It's, as I said before, it's interwoven with dressage training. It is not something separate. Um, so that's my rant. And the value of crossing streams, again, from a proprioceptive benefit. So I love that you have so many pictures of you and prawns crossing streams, Lynn. It's delightful. It's wonderful.
And the fun part of that is he's having fun. He wants to go forward. And this is one of those other mental benefits of getting out of the arena is the horse sees a purpose. We're going somewhere. We're going across this field or down this trail. And so you have forward, and I'm thinking forward more freely than a horse is going to feel in the arena where there's always a fence at the end somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. And the other kind of main activity, it is not that different from the look of it, but the main activity that I encourage a lot of horses to be able to do because they are wired for this is to ride, or in the German regulation manual I keep referring to, they call it a march, a long march versus a long ride. But to be able to cover a long, slow distance, so approximately 6 miles per hour, which is, a slow jog. It's not a frantic pace. It's just a steady forward movement for about 15 miles. Now, obviously, I'm not advocating you do this with a horse that's basically off the couch, so to speak. But if you, in the peak of your riding season, which for most of us would be midsummer, I'm guessing, if you kind of step back and look at your program and ask, are you creating a versatile horse, or are you kind of getting stuck drilling down too much, maybe on your specialty, whatever that is? Ask yourself, could you go out right now for a long, slow, steady jaunt, either with friends or solo? Because remember, riding solo and in groups is something that we want to be able to do. And, the reason for this is that long, slow aerobic output for horses, as I said, they are hardwired for this. They really have evolved to do this by nature of evolving out in the great wide open and moving for their food and to find safety and find water. It recruits these aerobic enzymes I've mentioned before in earlier talks and keeps a good supply of enzymes in the muscles without creating a lot of lactate or metabolic waste that comes as a result of harder efforts. So if you do like a more rigorous effort or a lot of collection, that often creates a waste byproduct. That's the result of hard exercise, feel the burn, right? Quote unquote. Long, slow, steady work, if the horse is, decently fit, should not do that. It creates what I call durability, which is something that's a little bit underappreciated in today's sport horses. We've gotten so good at breeding horses that come out of the womb with big fancy gaits. And sometimes we can lose sight of the fact that we need to help them be durable, not just flashy and fancy. And historically, horses would receive this stimulus from being all around horses. They would probably pull the cart to church on Sunday and they may do some work around the field. And they were probably also the family riding horse. And they just got a lot of activity. And I can't emphasize enough how important this is to any horse. In fact, I was just skimming through another training book today. I think it was Christopher Hess's book. It's several years old at this point, but he was addressing, rider questions and challenges that they're dealing with, various training problems related to dressage mostly. And a number of times, his answer was to make sure that horses are getting this kind of a stimulus, like a long, slow, steady stimulus on a semi-regular basis. Horses should not be exercised for just, 40 to 60-minute installments. They're capable of a lot more, but also that becomes protective of their structures. So again, we're avoiding sidelined horses that are injured simply through lack of mobility and movement. So we'll move on to the next slide. And we sort of touched on this, but let me flesh this out a little bit more. So when we say a horse should be, kind of well-rounded in our view, what does that mean? So riding out on natural objects, ability to cross small logs, jumps, barriers, the ability to stay organized on hills, and also I don't know how else to say this, so I say the ability to do dressage to approximately third level. But what I mean by that is a horse is able to do at least a single flying change. They have balanced gaits, walk, trot, canter, so they're able to keep a rhythm. They respond to the rider's seat cues. They're able to make a single flying change. They're able to collect their gaits and extend their gaits a little bit. This doesn't mean you're going to go win your local show, but they just have the ability to do that a little bit based on their aptitude. And they may have been introduced to some lateral movements. Maybe they can do a little shoulder in, for example. They should definitely be well versed in leg yield. And to me, these are the skills that display and require athleticism and agility. And they demonstrate that the horse is using both sides of its body equally, that there's really a good activation in the musculature. And as I said, it used to be the case that most horses would be trained to this level prior to specializing. I mean, obviously, thoroughbred race horses they might be outliers, but most other disciplines were trained to this level prior to specializing. Now things are a bit different, especially with futurities and young horse classes in most disciplines. People start quote unquote specializing when a horse is 2, 3 years old, and in my opinion, shouldn't even be ridden, but nonetheless. So they lose this kind of all around athleticism. And it doesn't matter what kind of a horse you're on. It can be a sturdy Morgan with, big thick legs. It could be some big rangy thoroughbred off the track. They're all capable of this. So again, and you don't, the goal isn't to be in the arena ad nauseum until you've mastered all of this. The goal is to kind of dabble towards this level of mastery, if you will, of this type of balance and maneuvers in conjunction with riding out on terrain and encountering natural obstacles. They should happen simultaneously. And for those of us that have had the chance, so, well, like your photos, Lynn, to observe a horse that's had this kind of training, it's delightful. It's delightful to see a horse that's calm and curious in its mind and really able to organize its body to its own ability at various tasks. So then we'll move on to the last one. Now, the last one, as I mentioned, so we've covered kind of what the main tasks that I would say I like to see in a versatile, well-rounded horse. Obviously, if there's other things that you enjoy doing, particular kinds of obstacles, we haven't really even touched on driving, but I know many folks out there ride and drive their horse. I think that's super cool. So your exact activities might be slightly different, but the ones I've touched on here are kind of the baseline for me of a versatile horse. Then the bonus ones, again, these came from the German manual just because I was curious about what they considered to be an all-around horse. The bonus activities would then be learning to carry special gear and equipment. So I think in today's world, that could be like the folks who do mounted archery or parade type work like we see here in this photo where the horses really do need to get used to a lot of stuff banging on. There's our pack horses, with a lot of stuff on them and banging around and moving. And then or pulling a carriage, which I just mentioned. And then in according to the German cavalry manual, the horses learning to swim was an extra bonus. And it's interesting in that training manual, they concede that not every horse is well suited to swim, I guess, in the capacity that they would desire. So they tried to really identify the horses that would excel and bring out that talent in them. So I have to say I've dropped the ball on that. I don't know about you, Lynn, but I've never taught a horse to swim. I'm not sure I'd know how to start. I think I might just jump in and hope for the best. But so so that's what I had. And as we wrap up, are there any final thoughts here swirling around on
I
your
well, I'm looking at your foot. Well, back to the swimming. I've only ever one time been on a horse who was swimming, and she already knew what she was doing. But it was so wonderful. I really wish that I had more opportunity to take a horse swimming. And I know they use it sometimes for rehab, so it seems that it could certainly be a very beneficial thing for them. And back to your bonus photo here. Not only are those horses carrying equipment, but they're working in tight formation. And that's another skill that I think has been lost a lot. The 4-H leaders that I knew from 30, 40 years ago thought nothing of having their kids working in doing drill formations where the horses were working all in tight formation together. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people expect of their horses anymore. And I think another thing that is often overlooked is the value of just taking a horse for a trail ride, both as R&R and as getting out of the arena. Um, Trail horses routinely have to carry equipment, carry saddlebags, carry water, carry trail clearing tools, and that just becomes business as usual. And having branches touch them as they go by, and birds fly in front of them, and chipmunks run under their feet. All of these things prepare horses for a lot steadier nerves, I think. In my experience, and I don't know what yours is, Jack, but in my experience, it seems that you can take a trail horse who's used to being out in the world a lot, bring him in the ring, and sharpen his responses, and get him in the show ring in at least at basic levels without a huge amount of additional training. But if you take a horse who's only ever been in the ring and take him out on a trail, you can it may take a whole lot longer to have a horse who's comfortable doing that job
I
because it's
100%, yeah, I 100% agree because the word you used, sharpen, to take a trail horse and you can bring it in the arena and sharpen it to perform in a show discipline. That is exactly right because I know I keep repeating this point, but a lot of the physical preparation, depending what kind of trail riding you've done, for that horse to be able to balance and round its top line and carry itself, mainly that does come down to just sort of understanding and connecting to the rider's seat. Because as I mentioned, the propulsion muscles should be pretty well developed from being out on trail. Their mental state is usually quite good. And then also, horses that routinely ride, long periods, as I already mentioned, a couple hours or so, they'd find natural rhythm. Generally, those horses are pretty rhythmic. You can plug them into a trot and they're not like foot down on the gas pedal and then slow down and then vroom, vroom, vroom. They pretty much have learned to lock into a rhythm. And so when you bring them to the arena and kind of show them how to express that rhythm, and bend on a circle, for example, and lift their back, then everything's there. They're physically prepared. You just need to add some knowledge to things or remind them if they've already, historically had some training. Going the other direction, taking a horse that's only ever been in the arena for 10 years and going out on the trail, everything is mind blowing. The physical stimulus and changes, everything you just mentioned, the surfaces underfoot and the mental stimulus, it's too much. And it's a big job, but it is one worth doing in small bites in my world.
yes, I think so. And I
Wonderful. Well, as we wrap up, I guess I would just encourage listeners to pause and ask yourself, look at this week, next week, maybe the week after that, and kind of ask how many different activities are you doing with your horse, or are you getting pretty set in a routine? What's your list for the top, activities that would count for making a versatile horse? What are your closing thoughts, Lynn?
I think you summed it up summed it up pretty well. And you don't have to think about going out and competing to be competitive. Go out and have fun, and that's the foundation of you and your horse feeling a good partnership. And then you can start working with the improving his physical fitness and whatever competitive interest you might have, or just have fun. That's legitimate too.
Very legitimate.